Hi there, Reuben here for Native Instruments, and in this walkthrough I'm going to be looking at an orchestral cue that I wrote using Cinesamples products. If you're already thinking that this seems familiar, then you'd be right, as this time last year I composed a big adventure track using some of their core libraries. Here's a quick blast of that. This time around, I'll be taking some of the musical ideas from that previous piece and expanding on them, using different instrumentation and creating an alternative feel. This new piece of music showcases Cinesamples libraries that I didn't previously use, like CineStrings SOLO, CineWinds PRO, CineBrass PRO, CineBrass Descant horn, CinePiano, and Taylor Davis violin. Here's a preview of the track. That first, slower section of the cue uses almost exclusively these libraries that are new to me. Just for fun, in the second, faster section, I've thrown all of my Cinesamples libraries together, using some of the instruments and articulations that I already love, but that I didn't get the chance to show off before. From the off, it's worth noting that all Cinesamples instruments play very nicely together, as most of the recording sessions took place at SONY Pictures Scoring Stage in Los Angeles. That's why you get a Hollywood-style sound straight out of the box. As ever, I've only got a short amount of time to cram in everything that I want to demonstrate, so in this minute-and-a-half cue there's over 30 different tracks, many with multiple articulations and instruments. I'll open up each track individually and show you what's going on, and where I've changed the default patches, although lots of the patches are straight up out of the box. It's worth noting that I've used Eastwest spaces for some reverb, and there's also some subtle mastering from Ozone, but I'll turn those off for now so you can hear things more clearly. So let's dive straight in. CineStrings SOLO is a collection of deep sampled orchestral solo strings with adaptive legato, and I've used all of the instruments, violins 1 and 2, viola, cello and bass. Because this first section of the track is slower and I don't want rebos to appear in the wrong places, I've activated the infinite sustains in the mapping menu, so that sustains loop nice and smoothly. It's also worth noting in this menu that you can see the different settings for regular and expressive legato, and also control the accent overlay. With these strings, and with many of the other patches, I've opted for a mic mix that's a default called Bright JW, which mimics the sparkling and precise mixing of a John Williams score. As we go through the track, you'll see that sometimes I've tweaked these default mic settings. You'll also find some changes to the EQ and reverb in this panel as we go along, just to help certain instruments sit in the mix more comfortably. For example, with the cello, I've backed off the mid-range frequencies ever so subtly, as they were resonating just a little. When you're writing your own pieces, don't be afraid to experiment with EQ, especially if there's one instrument that's poking out a bit too much and dynamic shaping isn't helping. Let's look at CinePiano next, which plays the initial melody of the piece. Have a listen. This melody is actually very similar to a line from my previous Cinesamples cue. Whereas previously it was used as a fast repetitive motif, this time around it's the main melody. The piano itself is a 9-foot concert grand recorded on the MGM Scoring Stage. I've used two of the patches, the regular piano and also a cinematic mix, which is a more intimate sound, captured with a dedicated set of microphones that are unique to this patch. That plays the dreamy melody, whilst the standard piano plays the accompanying chords on a different track. Towards the end of the piece, I'm using low notes to punctuate the brass stabs. Moving on, parts of the other melodies are also picked up by some solo woodwind instruments from CineWinds PRO. I've purposely chosen some more interesting ones, including E-flat clarinet, soprano recorder, English horn, and contrabassoon. In fact, CineWinds PRO has a huge variety of these more unusual instruments, including playable flutes and recorders, pipes, whistles, and even some pre-recorded phrases for instruments as diverse as uilleann pipes and duduk. Just like the solo strings, the 5 different mic options can be mixed, and I've sometimes pushed up the surround mix or reduced the close mics to push instruments further back into the hall. You can hear that very obviously with the soprano recorder. The alto flute patch acts as a lively rhythmic part, accompanying the string section, which I'll come on to later. It's a nice change of timbre from the standard flute section. Next up, the brass, and first up I want to give a special mention to CineBrass Descant horn. Although I've used it very sparingly in this piece, the tone and legato playability is just gorgeous. It's a relatively simple instrument with just a couple of patches, but excels at emotional solos and is particularly smooth in the higher registers. I've contrasted the Descant horn with the enormous overblown 12 French horn patch from CineBrass PRO. It's just for one little motif, but the weight of these instruments brings us rolling into the final fast section of the cue. This is a technique that I often use to increase the drama. Rather than just layering more of the same solo instruments, find a patch that has ensemble instruments recorded. The players move the air in the room in a different way and will have more presence and power, despite the actual volume being pretty much the same. CineBrass PRO has all of the extended instruments and techniques that complement CineBrass CORE, including monster low brass, various mutes, more soloists, and ensemble effects. I've used a variety of these patches in the cue, combining them in some interesting and I think pretty effective ways. Looking at the final section of the cue, I've used triple-tongue muted trumpets and trombones for punctuation. This kind of playing is easy to do with the key switches here at C# and D#, which will automate double and triple tonguing to the speed of your key release. A combination of horn ensemble rips and CineBrass SONORE, Cinesamples trumpet and horn ensemble works nicely together. The horns provide the rips into the first note of each trumpet and horn fanfare. There's actually some more ensemble horns beefing up that part 2 from CineBrass CORE. These are at the bottom of the project with all of the other ensemble patches. The next 2 tracks use the talents of Taylor Davis, a virtuoso violinist famed for her live work and video game cover versions. This expressive violin is especially good at legato playing, with a nimble style that auto-adjusts to your playing speed. It feels just great under the fingers. There's 2 different mixes and I've used the alternative mix here. Do have a listen to the legato and portamento. Of course, there are lots of other solo violin techniques too. So that's it for the instruments that I didn't use in the last video, mostly featuring in the first section of this queue. But of course, I couldn't leave it there. So for the second part, I wanted to demonstrate how quickly you can write using just the ensemble patches of VOXOS, CineBrass CORE, CineStrings CORE, CineWinds CORE, and CinePerc. The bulk of this faster final part of the queue is composed using just a few tracks with the combined ensemble patches from each library. Here's what these ensembles sound like without any of the other tracks playing. VOXOS is Cinesamples' epic choir library, but it can also do delicate and refined. I've used the female bum-bums for the more intimate sections of this cue. Then there's performed major and minor chords that I've combined together to create some dissonant extended chords. The phrase builder patch covers everything from shouty vocals to whispered phrases. I've programmed a simple 4-syllable pattern that's completely meaningless, but it adds so much Bloodborne style drama to the mix. First with men and then adding in the women. For the ensemble strings from CineStrings CORE, I've mixed mostly room and surround mics, and used different velocities to trigger both spiccato and staccato in the same track. You can see the default mapping for these just here, although you can set up your own mappings for any Cinesamples library. A quick note on the composition, especially regarding the strings. Towards the end of the track, I've removed the higher strings and a lot of the other high elements so that the violin solo can cut through nice and clearly. With the CineWinds CORE ensemble, it's again a case of combining shorts and longs, using velocity and the sustain pedal. These ensemble articulation patches are very versatile in that respect, so you can do all this articulation switching within just one track. The same with CineBrass CORE, using eighth and half notes triggered by velocity. CinePerc has many instruments and articulations, over 100 gigabytes in fact, but just like my first Cinesamples queue, I've used by far the most versatile patch, the ensemble orchestral percussion. This contains all of the most useful instruments and articulations, so you can hear glockenspiel, tubular bells, cymbals, bass drums, snares and triangle. As well as the traditional orchestral percussion, I wanted to show off one other highlight of CinePerc, the drum kit. I've always found integrating drum kits into orchestral music a huge challenge, as they often come pre-mixed for rock rather than for scoring. The CinePerc drum kit is recorded on the MGM Scoring Stage, so it integrates perfectly. So that's all the tracks. For the mixing, it was simply a case of adjusting EQ to taste on each individual patch, just a couple of tweaks here and there. The orchestral sections are mostly already recorded in situ, but I have used panning to emphasise the positioning. On the master bus, it's East-West Quantum Leap spacers, with a slightly longer reverb than the last track, as I like the sound of this one more with the more delicate instrumentation during the first part of the cue. My favourite mastering suite, Isotope Ozone, has been used to roll off low-end rumble, add subtle vintage compression, and give an EQ bump to some lows and mids that was slightly lacking. Then there's tape saturation and limiting. All of this evens out the dynamics and shaves off some of that digital feel, whilst boosting the volume up to modern levels. Hopefully you've enjoyed this cue breakdown. To finish, I'll play first the track that I made a year ago, and then follow it with this new track so you can hear how they belong to the same family. Thanks for watching.